Hello and welcome to GreenFleet Talks. My name is Kate Armitage and I'll be hosting the discussion today. And I'm delighted to be joined by Matt Dillon, who's Head of Commercial Vehicle at Ayvens. Hi
there.
Matt.
Okay. Hi.
Hi. Nice to speak to you.
You too.
Matt, a lot of people may be thinking, oh, I've never heard of Ayvens, but they definitely have, haven't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So Ayvens is just a bit of an intro. Ayvens is a global vehicle leasing company. We operate in like 42 countries worldwide. We've got about 3.3 million vehicles as well. So we're a combination of what people probably remembered of legacy, ALD, and LeasePlan. Those organisations, and certainly within the UK, we're providing leasing and fleet management and consultancy services with over sort of approximately 300,000 vehicles. So all under management.
Great, thank you. Bigger and better is how
yes,
I think.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we've got a fair bit to cover today, Matt. You are our van expert, so let's dive straight in.
Yeah.
So the plug-in van grant has recently been extended. Do you think that additional financial incentives are needed specifically when it comes to vans?
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly from the plug-in van grant perspective, I think that's a strong signal from government to they're committed to it. So certainly decarbonisation in the commercial vehicle market, and obviously, as I said, the electric market's going through a bit of a stagnant phase. I think when you look at sort of registrations at the moment, certainly end of 2024, the market share was sort of similar to that to sort of 2023 as well. But yeah, it was some way off the 10% ZEV mandate of last year, and obviously this year is now 16%. So, we've still got a bit of way to go, but there's some really good news stories. Year to date registrations are up, market share is improving, so that is helping. And I think certainly the plug-in van grant is making that difference in certain cases, and it certainly contributes to to some extent bridging the EV and diesel gap from a TCO perspective. But yeah, it's certainly helped increase the number of vehicles on the fleet. But there's certainly other financial incentives that we could be looked at, other than sort of the plug-in van grant. So many fleet operators, they're still looking for further, I think, support to make business cases work. And ultimately, TCO analysis is the critical element, to any decision-making progress. So achieving parity with diesel it still remains a challenge. So, especially when you look at those that are using the public charging network, so any support that could be done around making the public network a bit more affordable, a bit more accessible as well for vans, that would be massively welcomed. But I think when I mentioned sort of return to depot fleets, they're often faced with really, I guess, quite extensive and expensive infrastructure upgrades at times. So I think obtaining some kind of financial support, for capacity or connection upgrades, that's going to make a real difference. And it's certainly going to help, I think, longer term investment within EV transition. And, it also, I'm also a big believer in that the used car, or say the used van market, should I say, the used market in general, is a really important part. And I think, from our perspective, I think it could make a real difference if there's some kind of incentives going on around the used car market, really just to boost that as well. So yeah, no, there's absolutely opportunity in there for more incentives, and certainly, when we look at, for example, the VED as just it's basically aligning itself with diesel now. So that's another sort of quite an impact, to TCO, and that's going to make a big difference to costs.
Yeah, I think it is, and I think this is an oversight really, because vans are behind passenger vehicles.
They are, yeah, absolutely.
And not just in terms of the take up, but kind of before that, in terms of the technology. There are reasons why the van market is still struggling in comparison to the passenger car market. So to align it in terms of VD, for example, is not terribly helpful when, like you say, that TCO is absolutely critical, much more so, I think, with vans than with cars.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was kind of challenging as it was, but to start throwing sort of additional cost into that is Yeah, it's not helping. It's probably the best way of putting it.
Yeah. Well, we're painting a bit of a grim picture, but it's not all bad. However,
No, there's some really positive stuff out there. Absolutely.
is I mean, you touched on the charging infrastructure, but what other obstacles do fleets face when it comes to switching to electric vehicles?
No, there are obstacles. There's no doubt about that. But I think it's worth mentioning that electric vans are improving all the time at the moment, and we're really starting to see some investment that came through from cars trickle into the second generation versions of vans. Definitely, there's definitely more models available now, and and that's really evident. And also a number of great cases of where some of those early adopters and some of those high-profile fleets have really made it work within their operations. But however, there still seems to be challenges around range and charging speeds, and certainly the payload restrictions for a number of fleet use cases. But, I guess when we're talking about obstacles, I think probably one of the largest one is probably productivity. Any time lost needing to charge during a shift is lost revenue, and that is, that has a massive toll potentially on, when taking into account TCO modeling and operational efficiency. So I think one of the key challenges here is probably the charging speeds of electric vans. They still lag quite some way behind cars, and this is an area that really needs addressing with OEMs, because I feel it's a real barrier to adoption, and it could genuinely be a bit of a game changer for certain fleets that are, and the industry as a whole. I think a small amount of investment potentially could really move that forward in terms of that tech. And it's more arguably charging vans at a faster rate is probably more important than cars to some extent. So if you look at it, but yeah, as I said, infrastructure. Yeah, sorry. Infrastructure, is absolutely another obstacle. And when not all public, charging locations are designed for vans, as we all know. So, spaces are a bit of a premium, I think, and sometimes they can be a bit too small, and there might be height restrictions in certain areas. All taking up too much space and that can also cause a bit of reputational damage. We've seen that as well. Taking up a bit too much space, but as I mentioned before, sort of depot fleets or return to depot fleets, they face some significant costs when it looks at upgrading capacity or connections. So absolutely, there's some challenges there. And I going on to sort of more recently, sort of press wise, around the 4.25 ton derogation that is for alternative fuel vehicles. There's a consultation going on at the moment, but I think certainly things like the annual MOT testing that they've got to go under at the moment is causing another barrier, another bit of uncertainty about managing and adopting those types of vehicles, which to be fair, having a bit more range and payload available is going to open up a vast number of other solutions or for more business cases. So definitely
this is the catch-22 of because of the battery, the vehicles are heavier, which puts them over that 3.5 tons and into that grey area of the derogation. There has been some loosening in terms of the additional training drivers had to have.
They have,
but actually the network that maintains those vehicles is different and not necessarily equipped for the MOTing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's restricted. The HEV network is restricted in terms of what they can take in terms of those lanes, and that is something to consider. And if there's a way we can bring that back, I think to some extent, and make it more of a 3-year cycle rather than or initial 3-year cycle anyway, it's going to make a big difference to costs in general and capacity and availability. So and that all knocks onto downtime, which is so critical. So but we as Ayvens, we're happy to work on any of those obstacles we've mentioned earlier. We've got a dedicated consultancy team that can absolutely help look at those and help you mitigate some of those maybe some future policy changes that come in play.
So as well as the plug-in van grant being extended, we've also heard that the workplace charging grant has been extended for another year. What advice would you give when it comes to installing EV charging?
Yeah, so workplace or depot charging is absolutely important part of supporting fleets with the transition. So, and it is great to hear that the workplace charging scheme is obviously still there. But I'm sure that funding won't be there forever. And as we know, kind of financial support can be pulled at any point. So, it's worth taking advantage while you can. But yeah, I think when it comes to installing charging networks and solutions, I think it's safe to say like that. One size doesn't fit all. And there are many factors that you do really need to take into account, especially when you consider what you might need today, but also what you might need tomorrow. Ensuring you're future-proofing your infrastructure, certainly at a depot. Because if you don't do that, you're kind of potentially incurring significant costs later on or in the future. But it's also very important not to overspec as well. Things are very expensive. So, you've got a danger of potentially having a bit of a temptation to do that because you don't want to get caught short, I think. But, there is a danger. Is the excessive expenditure could really be a barrier to actually getting the business case across the line anyway. So, it's worth noting that there are also quite a lot of different costs when it comes to sort of charging units as well. It can be really different in charging. But yeah, also, when you look at depots, you might want to consider, I guess, maybe like power banks, charging units that are all portable powered power banks that you can get. There's some great innovation in that particular space at the moment. So, they can be ultimately deployed to complement what you've got today, or, it may help where you've got a shorter lease period, or, there's a temporary site that needs power. That they're really, really great. But yeah, mostly importantly, if capacity or connection upgrades are required, these can take a lot of time to actually get into play. So you need to plan accordingly, really plan accordingly, and really ensure that your supply is happening at the same time as you're having vehicles delivered. So, that's quite a tricky balance, if I'm honest. But yeah, planning is really key to success. So it's important to make sure that everybody in the business who's involved, any key stakeholders that would influence this are engaged very early on, and that they are part of the full planning process. And as I said, Ayvens can absolutely help in this place, in providing support with solutions in that area.
Yeah, great. And I absolutely echo that the charging of the infrastructure may take longer to procure and deploy than the leasing of the vehicles.
Absolutely.
So don't make the mistake of being all about the van and then thinking actually how we're going to charge it.
They definitely run on different timescales.
Yeah, and your point about the mobile solutions is a good one. Especially if you're taking a short-term lease, if you're just testing the viability, these mobile chargers basically, they run off a standard AC three-phase supply, and you literally just plug it in with a Blue Commando, and then the unit fools the car into thinking it's talking to a fully installed charge point. So it's definitely cost effective, and also useful in like workshops and stuff where you're wanting to charge multiple vehicles, over the
no, I think there's loads of use cases there. As you said, you could have a temporary site that needs charging or needs power, or it's complementing something so you don't have to upgrade your connection. And like you say, there's a multitude of potential options there. So I think it's definitely an area that people should look at. When they're assessing their needs.
The ultimate granny cable. Okay, and then so my final kind of question is, and we ask this a lot, Matt, but for fleets who are starting out on this journey and are just beginning this assessment process, how do they identify the most suitable vehicles for electrification?
Yeah, I mean, that's it. The ever increasing number of vans that are coming onto the market, and I would say that operational capabilities are improving, and as you said earlier about ranges and things like that. But and we've also seen quite a lot, quite interestingly, there's some new vehicles coming to market at the moment, I think, addressing some of those challenges that have been there before. So I don't know, like Flexis and Verizon and Kia this year. So but we're definitely seeing more fleets successfully transitioning, so and in certain key parts of their operation. But I think it is fair to say that some fleets have probably looked at the lower hanging fruit, where electrification was just a little bit easier to sort of adopt. But however, I mean, I think the most important thing is data is critical here. You know, certainly when establishing, you know, what might be the most suitable operation or the vehicles to transition, and analyzing things like telematics data, that can really help build up that sort of really detailed picture of your operation, specifically sort of how and where and when you sort of your vehicles move, and, you know, and critically kind of where they stop and for how long as well. But I think telematics isn't the only part of this picture, you know. For example, Ayvens we've developed our TCO Plus model, which is total cost of operation solution. That provides a suite of tools effectively where in a modeling that not only it doesn't just look at, say the basic costs such as rent or fuel, but it looks at the impact of operational downtime, energy costs, vehicle reliability, the SMR network performance as well. But, you know, that's something that I think you need to look at. You need to look at the whole picture when you're looking at selecting the right vehicles, and you do need to look at every part of it. It isn't just the start bits, you know, in terms of it's got to look at that whole period of operation through its life. So, you know, there's certainly work that, you know, our consultancy team, you know, and our commercial vehicle team that we have would be more than happy to help with, you know, and I think there's been a huge number of customers that have benefited from that TCO work that we've been doing and that modeling. So, yeah, be more than happy to share that and work with customers that are interested in that or need to set up their transition to electric, really.
Yeah, that's a great offer, Matt, and a brilliant service, and it's a really essential part, because you're effectively benchmarking, aren't you, at the beginning, and saying this is what we expect is going to happen.
Yeah.
And then you get the vehicles on board and you can test your assumptions. Were we right about this? Do we need to change that? Were we cautious, or were we you know, overly confident? So it's
a constant learning cycle. I think nobody has
a
crystal ball necessarily, but the data is improving every single day. There's more and more coming through. So to be able to make some of those, I guess, those data-led decisions is becoming not necessarily easier, but it's out there. You know, you do it, and as you said, you won't get it right every time, but at least you're starting on the right platform.
And you've got and learning, you know, learning through doing is the only way that you're going to get to the end game.
There's a bit of being brave as well with this as well. You know, so
be bold. Do you hear that? Be bold.
Yeah, be bold. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Matt, thank you very much for your insight today. It has been a pleasure talking to you. You've given some great advice and plenty of enthusiasm for those fleets that are literally on the cusp of making that switch. And I do hope they reach out to you.
That's great. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Cheers. Thank you. Thank you, of course, to Ayvens for joining GreenFleet Talks. That is about all we've got time for. Thank you for watching, and please tune in to GF Television again soon.